All right. Deb Campbell obtained her Bachelor of Science with a major in agronomy and an emphasis in soil management from the University of Guelph. She then went on to complete her Certified Crop Advisor certification in 2000. Since then, Deb added to that certification by completing the 4R Nutrient Management Specialty and the Resistance Management Specialty. Deb has a broad range of experience from previously working for Cargill and Syngenta in an array of positions. From agronomist to account manager, she understands all aspects of growing a successful crop, both from the field and business perspective. She has production experience in corn, soybeans, cereals, canola, edible beans, alfalfa, and cover crops. Deb was awarded the Certified Crop Advisor Award of Excellence in 2003. She has served on the Certified Crop Advisor Board of Directors since 2009, and in 2020 served as the chair of the board. Deb is currently a co-chair for the Provincial Soil Action Group. This group is tasked with creating an implementation plan for Ontario's agricultural soil health and conservation strategy. She provides technical expertise to the plant health biosecurity webinars offered by OSCIA. Deb is also a director at the local Grey County Soil and Crop and is first vice for Grey Bruce Farmers Week. She has also previously served on the board at Agscape. Most days you will find Deb checking fields as she works with farmers to achieve their cropping and business goals. Deb owns and operates Agronomy Advantage Inc. and lives on a farm just west of Dundalk, Ontario. Jenn Doelman has her Bachelor of Science from the University of Guelph with an emphasis on agronomy and communications. She is also an independent Ontario Certified Crop Advisor with the Nutrient Management Specialty and teaches Cropping Systems 1 at Algonquin College's Agribusiness Program in Eastern Ontario. Jenn and her husband Mike farm 1,100 acres in the Upper Ottawa Valley. Farming in a rain shadow on heavy silty clay soils, good soil health is crucial to the farm's success. Reduced tillage practices and a diverse crop rotation has been enjoyed on many of their fields for several decades, to the benefit of soil structure and water quality. Cover crops, soil amendments, and honeybees have been more recent additions to the farm's soil health strategy. So welcome, Jenn and Deb.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Emily, for the introduction, and thank you, Jessica, for including me in the sessions today. I really appreciate the invitation. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. All right, so Jenn and I have tag teamed a couple of times here now on various aspects of soil health, and we kind of have a lot of fun. And so our approach today here, we want to talk about a systems approach to cover crops, and so I'm going to look at some of the interconnections, the aspects of cover cropping, and that agronomic side of the systems approach, and Jenn's going to basically walk us through her experience on her farm and some of the other agronomic aspects that have she's witnessed in her program where she's farming with her family. So a little bit about myself. You already had like a 10-minute bio. My goodness, I think I need to pare that down. So this is where I'm located, is north of Toronto. We are an ag country, and the Dundalk area is known as the Highlands of Ontario. This is a region that we're working in, a region that spans from Perth County all the way over to east of Lake Simcoe. So a fairly significant swath through the middle of Midwestern Ontario. And our focus here is, the agronomy aspects of production ag, but we're also working very heavily in the soil health aspect of production ag. To me, they are part of the same package, and you can't have one without the other. And I think that message is growing louder and louder as time goes on. And we work with our clients and farmers in the area to keep that focus on the soil and work to improve soils over time, stabilize soils over time. And that's a key focus area for us. So what do you see when you see a field like this? It's August, bales are in the field. The baling isn't quite done here. But for me, I see opportunity. When we're looking at cover crops, we recently had a survey done here in Ontario, looking at uptake of cover crops and some of the challenges or issues, hurdles around cover crops. But really, we do have quite a phenomenal success story in Ontario when it comes to cover crop practices. And essentially, we want to be setting these up for success. And there's no right or wrong way to do a cover crop. First and foremost, there can be as many different versions of a cover crop system as there is farmers in Ontario. Well, maybe not quite, but there's a diverse range of how to do a cover crop. So, this isn't a space where folks should be criticizing anyone on their approach to cover cropping. Just about anything goes. So I had an opportunity the season of 2021 to work on a pilot project with Ontario Soil and Crop. And we were, they were piloting, working with farmers in certain regions directly as a cover crop coach. So the producer got one-on-one time with a certified crop advisor that was knowledgeable in cover cropping systems. And, essentially they got 2 hours of time in their operation, kicking dirt, talking about their system, talking about how to make it work, talking about what worked, what didn't, how are we going to improve on this next year. And I really enjoyed that project, that pilot project. There was a lot of insight to be gained on that. And I think, when I look at cover cropping and I talk to individuals who really haven't started in this space yet, that one-on-one coaching, just having somebody there to help you walk through some of the nuances, I think is very valuable. And it realistically, it doesn't even need to be a certified crop advisor. There's tremendous experience in the farm community, and peer learning is certainly an opportunity there as well. So when I look at the cover crop revolution, if you will, in Ontario over the past 8 to 10 years, I think of where we collectively started, and the results are really quite impressive. So with that opportunity, we're talking a systems approach, and the systems approach, we can look at all the interconnective components that go into the cover crop system. And this isn't the be all and end all. There's certainly other factors here as well. But if you took the cover crop block out of there and put in corn crop, I think most of us would look at that and go, okay, I know what my weed control plan is for my corn crop. I know what my fertility plan is for my corn crop. When I look at cover crop systems and I'm working with clients on building out a cover crop roadmap, it's the exact same thing. As I'm doing a corn crop plan in February, we tag on the cover crop plan for the season as we're going. It's part of the overall cropping plan. So, and these interconnections that we see between all these different components, it's a two-way street. So the weed control has influences on how well your cover crop establishes. Your cover crop has influence on how good your weed control is on wheat stubble in the fall. They go hand in hand. And the synergistic effect is incredibly valuable. And that is one of the reasons why we're wanting to increase the density of cover crops over time. And when you're targeting specifically weed control, when I look at resistant weed management, cover crops is front and center in that strategy for resistant weed management. Keep the ground covered, there's less opportunity for those weeds to grow. So when I'm looking at these components, it's the same with pest management. We're running into scenarios here now where you want to be considerate of the species in your cover crop, in that some of them can actually be hosts for additional pests. It works the other way as well. Some cover crops can actually suppress some insect pests. So it's a two-way street. And all of these components are interrelated, no different than your primary production crops that you're growing on your farms today. So it's a two-way street. And at the end of the day, yeah, there's a lot of bubbles on here, but you do want to keep it simple. And that is a very clear message. When I look at cover cropping, there's the entry level cover crop, add a little more complexity, in seasons to come, and graduate along the progress till, perhaps your end goal might be planting green. It's not maybe where you want to start. There's certainly some complexities there, but out of the gate, you want to be keeping things simple, I believe. Better chance of success that way. So, getting started, that would be sitting down and figuring out what are your cover crop goals, and then start looking at all those different components of what are the aspects of those interrelated pieces that are going to actually help you achieve your cover crop goal. Is it erosion control? Is that your primary driver for establishing a cover crop? Well, basically you want green growth, actively growing for as long a period of time as possible. So that will influence the species you select. Are you wanting to scavenge nutrients? Are you wanting to bust up a little bit of compaction, increase porosity, build structure, water retention? There's lots of different aspects to and goals that come out of your cover crop strategy, but also come out of, perhaps your overall soil health plan on your farm. So, it doesn't have to be fancy in order to get erosion control. It doesn't have to be fancy in order to get weed suppression. So a simple two-way mix with radish and oats, very effective, very effective. Established really easily, achieves incredible amount of growth in the fall, good ground cover, lots of good reasons to have that mix in your field. This is triticale peas, for livestock producers. Sometimes the interconnections are between your cover crop and actually having it as a feeding system in your operation. So it's dual purpose. And you might approach that a little bit differently than if you're strictly using it for traditional cover crop aspects. You have to be a little more intentional about a feeding system if that is your goal. So as I've mentioned, make it part of your crop plan right from the start. If you're buying seed in, December or maybe now, purchase your cover crop seed. I'll tell you right now, as we've seen some of our input costs go up, oat pricing, for example, which is a very dominant seed in a mix, oats are worth $460 a ton. So that's double what they were worth 2 years ago. And I realize we don't need a high seeding rate, but the dynamics of the seed costs in our cover crop mixes is going to change a little bit for 2022. So keep that in mind. And you can offset some of those costs. I mean, these are really dense pictures of cover crops. But what is the optimum density of a cover crop to achieve your goal? Is 1 plant per square foot enough? 2 plants per square foot? It doesn't need to be a carpet in order to achieve erosion control, for example. So perhaps reducing seeding rates in your cover crop, depending on how you're establishing it, could be a way to manage some of those costs and still maintain the cover crop in your system. So from my experience, I like starting with 1 to 3 species. The entry point to get started after cereals is a good spot to get initiated. If you're not growing cereals in your rotation, it gets a whole lot trickier to get an effective cover crop established in your system. The other thing about species selection, and Jen's going to talk about this, she's got some great slides on the different options of species and their strengths, but I look at some of the products in some of these mixes, and now, keep in mind where I live and work and operate in a lower heat unit zone. some of those species, they barely germinate. They barely get 2 inches tall. They're just not designed to be working in a 6 or 7 week growing system with cool nights. So keep in mind on your species selection that you want to have something that's truly tailored to your geography and the agronomics of your area. The other aspect that I like to look at with cover crops is, our goal here, your goal might be erosion control, but that is being done by creating biomass in your soil, on your soil, protecting it in those manners. There's research that certainly supports that more biomass, it's pretty straightforward. More biomass creates more stability in your soil by creating more organic matter over time. So the question becomes, are we applying fertilizer to make these cover crops grow more, to have more biomass from our cover crops? And that, that to me is a very individualistic decision, farmer by farmer. Adding nitrogen fertilizer, for example, adds another element, another layer of cost into a cover cropping system that you may or may not want to spend. Having a budget in place that you can use as a guide of, how much money you're willing to invest in your cover crop system. Now, and essentially the primary driver on that biomass will be nitrogen for most species that we're growing here in Ontario. If we're dealing with a lot of legumes in that mix, maybe not, but for any of the cereals, the sunflower, the radish, those are all highly responsive to nitrogen fertility. So if you have lots of residual and you're scavenging, great. Not everyone has that ability or that carryover. So what do you do? And this is a perfect opportunity to be introducing organic amendments, whether it's directly through manure, perhaps it's a biosolid, a refined biosolid. There's a tremendous amount of products on the marketplace today that can deliver that nitrogen, also deliver other nutrients as well. So you're getting a full range of nutrients and you're feeding your cover crops. So they're kind of they go hand in hand. I realize not everyone has manure, not everyone has access to it. However, getting on a list, getting started, maintaining soil fertility is a pretty important part of soil health. We don't talk about that enough, in my opinion. So figuring out ways to implement that into your cropping system is just as important as getting the cover crop there in the first place as well. So if you are feeding your cover crop, and that is your system, is to use some of that biomass as feeding, you have to be looking at nitrogen fertilizer. You'll double or triple your output. Perhaps you can feed on less acres. And it's incredibly important to amplify your cover crop strategy when you're using it for a feeding system. And in fact, you may even need to look at rust control if you're looking at a lot of cereals in your cover crop mix. There are some diseases come along with that aren't really conducive to feeding systems. So keep that in mind. It is a system, everything's interrelated, and disease control this year was quite interesting in 2021. It was the first year that, in my experience, we had to, because we had such a wet August, and in our region, at least anyway, we had a very slow wheat harvest. And by the time the combines were done, the baling was done, there was more weed growth in the fields than I would have liked to have seen. And, we went in, broadcast on, or seeded in our cover crop mix and trying to get it to establish at the same time where we had fairly high weed density. Not the greatest year for establishing our cover crop. So it doesn't feel right to me to have to be using extra herbicides as we're cover cropping. But, I've been doing this for a while now, and this is the first year I've encountered it. So I really don't consider that to be the norm. But I do know that given the opportunity again, we probably would have used a little more herbicide strategies in order to get the most out of our cover crop. So as a certified crop advisor trying to improve soil health, I'm not sure how I feel about adding extra herbicides into the mix, but for producers that truly have this as the backbone, as a backbone foundational strategy in their cropping system, it's important, yeah, to get that cover crop established well. So one of the other factors that I'm looking at when talking about cover crops or integrating cover crops into the system, I'm trying to, in a lot of cases, eliminate one pass of tillage. So again, that helps to offset the inputs required for cover crops. If we can take one pass of a cultivator, one pass of a disc out of the system and have the rooting ability of that cover crop mix basically do our natural tillage for us, that is part of my goal as well. And A, it offsets the cost of the cover crop, and B, we're maintaining better soil health in the big picture. So assessing how that can be delivered in your cover crop system, either through the species selection, sometimes it's debatable, based on your soil types. If you're heavier soil types, you may still need to have a tillage pass, at least for making a seed bed preparation. But there's opportunities there to refine tillage when you have cover crops in your system. A couple other points, herbicide carryover. If you're planting cover crops into wheat stubble as that entry point system, chances are we don't have a lot of herbicide issues coming out of our wheat crop. However, if you are an edible bean grower in front of that wheat crop, or an IP soybean grower in front of that wheat crop, there are some complexities of herbicide carryover that will inhibit the growth of certain species in your cover crop mix. And that gets missed a lot. Products like Pursuit, products like Classic inhibit a lot of broadleaf crops, broadleaf plant species for 24, 26 months. So again, make sure you're looking at that herbicide carryover, what your herbicide products are, especially even in our Roundup programs, Extend programs, we're still using a lot of conventional chemistry again. So if you're not satisfied with the establishment of your cover crop, that might be an area to look at and see what's going on there. There could be some interactions. So what if you don't grow wheat? How do we get these cover crops established? What does that system look like? And things get a whole lot more complex when you are looking at establishing a cover crop after soybeans, establishing a cover crop within or after corn. You guys being more represented in the southern part of the province, you have a lot more heat units to work with in the fall. So that is helpful. These are some stats that came out of University of Nebraska. So a survey of growers in that area where in a corn system, 66% of producers saw no effects of emergence. In a soybean system after the cover crop, 72% saw no effects on emergence from a planting green cropping system. So like I said, it is a bit more complex when you move into the planting green space, the overwintering, actively growing cover crops. So, as we're escalating our cover crop system into more complex systems, that's where I really see the benefit of a cover crop coach or some example of that. The Amber Howlands of the world, they just can't be everywhere at once. So tap into those resources locally if you can, certified crop advisor, a peer network. And because the cost of establishing the cover crop is one thing. The cost of a crop failure or an impact to your crop is completely different when we're talking $7 corn and $17 soybeans if you're an IP grower. So it's really important to have everything dialed in right when you move to the planting green space. Those timings for termination, those timings for planting so that you still have moisture in that seed bed. there's some areas and some nuances that things can go wrong, and you want to make sure that you're benefiting from the experience of someone else when you can't. But obviously the goal here with this system is to make sure we have actively growing cover crops in that spring runoff period, that high saturation window that we have in Ontario, you know, from March through till May, generally speaking. And that actively growing cover crop just is so beneficial from reducing the amount of runoff, reducing the infiltration rates of water through the soil profile. So there's a lot of beneficial aspects to that. Capturing that through a planting green system or a green overwintering cover crop. You know, there's a lot of focus on that, on how to make these systems work, and then also how to make them scalable, that more producers can do that. Because there's certainly a higher level of expertise and challenge that goes with it, even from your equipment setup perspective. So with that, I'm just going to wrap up with, you know, if you're looking at, you know, a systems approach on your cover crop, there's just a huge number of factors to be considering. And that's why like I've said, I like to start at a basic level cover crop, if you will. Not any less effective, but certainly a little more simpler on the production side. Looking at, you know, growing your confidence as you move along the spectrum of cover cropping, and you know, the effectiveness of meeting those goals as you're moving along that spectrum as well. And, you know, I had the opportunity as the chair of the board for the Certified Crop Advisors to go on a crop tour in Kansas. This was pre-COVID, a couple of years ago. And, you know, as we're driving around the countryside, wheat is a big crop in Kansas, as I'm sure everyone is aware of. Field after field after field of wheat stubble was overgrown with 6-foot tall fleabane, and mile after mile after mile of bus ride. And I was just astounded that there was nothing actively growing on this wheat stubble. So this tour was mid-September, and you know, so their harvest is earlier than ours. So they'd already had a 60 or even 90-day period of, you know, basically uncontrolled weed growth on this wheat stubble. And it just absolutely floored me, coming from the Ontario perspective of, you know, managing our wheat stubble in one form or another. I just couldn't fathom what I was seeing. And part of our tour was to get on farm with you know, a influential grower in a region, and it was his first foray into cover crops. And the watershed, the county representative, was basically launching a program to get growers interested in starting with cover crops. So this was 2 years ago, and you know, when I was the only representative from Ontario. We had one representative from Western Canada, and you know, I was thinking, wow, these guys are about 8 years behind us. And he truly felt that Ontario was, you know, definitely a leader here in North America when it comes to cover crop systems. And, you know, they were using a lot of our knowledge, a lot of our information in how they were launching information out to the marketplace in Kansas, and having producers come on board with their cover cropping systems. So, you know, there's a bit of a nugget to take away from this session, that we really are sort of setting the bar here from an Ontario perspective for North American cover cropping. And I think there's still lots of room to continue to evolve over the next few years. So if you haven't started, you know, take that first step here. We got lots of opportunity here in 2021, 2022. Build your plan now so that you're ready to go. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen, and she can talk about her story.
Sorry, finding that mute button is not easy on my cell phone. Thank you so much, Deb. I really enjoyed your presentation. I'm just going to make sure I'm sharing my presentation properly, which is never, how are we looking for that? Does it look okay?
We can hear you and see you.
Perfect. All right. So thank you very much, Jessica, and the whole team today for inviting me here. And thanks again, Deb, for such a great start to the presentation. Because yeah, I really enjoy tag teaming with you. It's kind of neat being able to do that 1-2 punch. So Deb did a really good job of kind of establishing the baseline. So I'm going to really focus more on what we've done on our farm and how I kind of take in that theory that us as certified crop advisors kind of always have in the back of our mind, and trying to help find that connection in the real world where, well, not sorry, CCAs work in the real world too. I mean, you know, on farm where we're having to deal with a lot of the hands-on stuff. So one thing about the systems approach, you see that in a lot of policy now and a lot of programs, you know, there's even bonus points when you apply for CAP funding if you can tie it into a systems approach. So the one thing I think when we're talking systems, and this is something a lot of people do without necessarily realizing what it is it's simply taking, instead of looking at something as like a 2D approach, like this is a cornfield, or 3D is here's a cornfield and here's the root structure I have here. What we do in systems approach is we simply add the element of time, like the fourth dimension of being able to understand this is what my crop does, you know, based on what happened last year and what will be happening next year. So even though we change our crop rotation to match, you know, to better suit profitability of crop prices, essentially I'm always working with 2 years in the past or 3 years in the past, and what are the next 2 years I'm planning for. So in cover crops, it really does allow for you to do that. So my bio, like Deb's, is incredibly long and pretty well told you everything you needed to know here, which is great. The only thing to add in is that while I am a first generation farm with my husband, technically as of 2022, up until now, I was a multi-generational farmer working with my parents, and we had an agribusiness and a very diverse rotation because of seed production. So I do have the benefit of coming in with a legacy of fields that have a longer term reduced tillage and having a very diverse rotation. The nice thing is that we were cow, calf, and beef until 2000. Thankfully, we were out before BSC hit. But I do live in an area that is very dairy, beef, and sheep farmer oriented, simply because we're farming in the little bits of clay belt between the Canadian Shield. So there's a lot of good pasture ground and a lot of ground around here that really shouldn't be soybean ground. So we get the benefit of having that, where I think a lot of you in Southern Ontario probably get the benefit of like poultry barns nearby or hog farms. So again, we just work with what our advantage is to our region. We are in a rain shadow. And even though, like Deb was talking about her being in the Highlands, where we are, we actually have fairly similar heat units to Guelph because we're more continental. So we have hotter summers, but we have colder winters and we have a shorter growing season. So we will typically get our killing frost early to mid-September. So my soils are very honest. And in 2012, we had a phase 3 drought that was absolutely brutal. We actually had a cornfield on sand, the one sand field we had that we offered to a neighbor for free, and they wouldn't take it off because it was going to cost them too much to harvest it. So that was really like one of my first years farming. And I grew up with it, and we see it now, summer droughts, tight soils. And what that means for me is when my soils are looking like you see in these pictures, like if I have to tie the kids together so they don't fall down the cracks, it's financial stress, it's helplessness, and it's frustration. So when you do everything by the book, right, in terms of your fertility, but you know, the crops are still dying, you know, you got to make some changes. So for us, the question was where to start. Our biggest challenges on our farm have been drought, soil structure, and then the common ones, cash flow, labor, access to equipment, time. So for our soil health strategy, obviously reduced tillage was a big part of what we did. But the other part we really started to look into was cover crops. Now the question was it a solution or was it busy work? And this is kind of it, is that sometimes, you know, and I really love how Deb was kind of talking about how Ontario is doing so well. Because sometimes I think we forget that. Because sometimes I'm a big advocate for cover crops, and I sometimes worry I'm coming across as an evangelist. You know, cover crops are our new Lord and Savior. They'll make your toilet bowl cleaner, and your kids will love you more. And like really, cover crops are a tool in a system, and they can be very effective. Or I'm really glad Deb brought it up. They can, if managed incorrectly or just maybe some bad luck, they can not necessarily. They can add to the headaches. So for our conclusion is we had to figure out what was going to work. And when we looked at it, we figured, what did we have to lose? Like it's not like we were going to do more tillage or throw more nitrogen on these crops to improve them. It wasn't going to make sense to start doing irrigation. So we needed to find another way to make this work. So where to start? And I know there's a lot of really good tools. One is the Midwest Cover Crop app or website that kind of helps you see where they lay out in terms of when they're ready. But another great one is one that our own tax dollars have paid for, and that is the OMAPA publication 811. In my cover crops class, this is one of the resources I help the students look at, and just what's the function? What are you trying to fix? So on our farm, I like the nitrogen production and I like the nitrogen scavenging, but for me, I really wanted to look at soil structure and compaction reduction. I don't so much have wind erosion at all, and even water erosion because we reduced tillage. But one that was really keen was emergency forage. And so in 2012, we had neighbors that were looked like begging for feed. So we planted a cover crop in rented ground that was really poor soil structure, inadequate drainage. And one guy bought it, that was great, but everybody else wanted it for free. And we're like, well, we're not working for free. So we worked it under. And it made a really big difference for a short time on that farm. Now, since then, and I'll talk about this later, we've let that farm go simply because a cover crop can only do so much if it's not something that you can manage the drainage in. So some of the considerations when you're choosing your cover crop is going to be things like when do you want it to come? I really do like how Deb talked about how cereals really reinforce a good cover crop base. That's really the only place we really have successful cover crops. Doesn't mean I'm not going to get into dabbling in other areas, but this is one I can definitely prioritize my budget for time and money. So some of the things I'll talk about later on, but just letting you know, these resources are a great way to kind of get started on it. And I really like how Deb was talking about sensitivity to herbicides. For us, it's more for the canola in our rotation, but we're really quickly learning that even though I like my classic for dealing with my perennial sow thistle and prickly lettuce, I have to be careful when I use it so it doesn't impact my red clover being established or my canola being established in the future. So it's one of those things where less is more. So on our farm, we really wanted to talk about what our goals were. Like when you're going to head out on a journey, you kind of need to have an agreed upon destination. Otherwise, you just get lost in the wilderness. So our number one goal is improved profitability. And I like to think for most of us on our operations, any of these decisions have that. Obviously, profit is capitalism is now a bad word, but plain and simple, we are for-profit businesses. We need to somehow be able to make ends meet and earn a comfortable life. So the other thing is resiliency. I wanted it in my fields because then it meant that I was more resilient and our family health was more resilient. So one of the things we like to look at is, are there any new opportunities? I like to try to make do with what I have. So some of those things are grazing, getting access to manure, even something as simple as having buckwheat honey, because I'm a honey producer. Now I know, I think it's Dan Petker, he had a really good agronomist episode, and he talked about how he pretty well has like a bidding war for people wanting to put honeybees in his buckwheat. I don't make that much money off of honey, so I obviously this is more commercial beekeepers. Fertility management is crucial, especially with, I sometimes think as much as we advocate for good fertility management, these high prices right now are going to move the bar in terms of nitrogen emissions, phosphorus, and any of these things, is we just simply can't afford to have any holes in the system anymore. The other thing is for us, we really want to improve that soil structure and soil health and mitigate compaction. So when you have problems in your fields, the cover crops aren't necessarily going to solve them all. Sometimes they're just going to help you see where those problems exist. So for me, I naively thought, oh, we'll just seed down, we'll put some red clover in, and then that's going to really help with the soil structure on the headlands. Well, the red clover doesn't come on the headlands because the ground is too tough. So, we need to be looking at this is that what's our baseline and how are we going to help augment that? So it's still something we're working on. I really like how Patrick's presentation today had talked about biodiversity and supporting the beneficials. It's kind of crazy whenever we're in a drought, we are in a summer drought as my bees and the other pollinators, that's actually a big a time when they actually are without because the flowers dry up. So by having things like this out there, you're keeping your beneficials going. Like, it's just nuts how many bees are out in the cover crop fields whenever they get in early enough in my neighborhood. And then emergency feed and extending the pasture season for neighbors. So shout out to Tracy Ryan and OSCIA because like Deb, I got the benefit of being an Accelerate Your Soil Health cover crop coach this year. And it was really neat because a lot of my like hardcore beef guys that work in construction all day and have these beef herds, and they really don't have time to come to meetings or do any of these programs. They were the ones that were reaching out to me saying, hey, I want to get some shoulder season cover crops in so that way I have either emergency feed or I can give my pastures a break. We also even did some cover cropping with a neighbor, and I'll talk about that here next. So our preferred cover crops, and this is like, I don't know if the Conservation Authority will like me saying this, but it's the ones you make money from. So for us, always with our growing season is if I can make money off of a cover crop, I'm going to try to do it. And so fall wheat, winter canola, alfalfa, other perennial forages, honestly, they're always going to be my number one because it spreads the workload, it spreads the risk, and maybe it's not a cover crop, but it keeps the ground covered over the winter. And so it makes a lot of sense. And so I'm sure for a lot of people that are very focused on like corn and beans, and because again, when I look at some of the yields coming off of longer seasons, it makes total sense. However, there's a lot of other things going on. And Deb spoke about how cereals are pivotal to cover crop success. And I truly believe that. So there's a couple different ways to really make some success from this, and I'll talk about them in a second, but I just really want to make sure that, you're exploring some of these other options and thinking from a system approach rather than just, oh, well, if I grow this, then I'm not going to make as much money on corn, or I'm not going to make as much money on beans, because good rotational systems, including cover crops, really do improve the profitability of your corn and beans. So for our cover crop up here on the left, what we did was we had a drought again last summer and the neighbors needed feed. So one of the neighbors approached us and said, what are you doing after your wheat comes off? So I was like, well, I'm probably just going to put in some oats or peas, something that's just going to, hold the soil structure. And he said, well, can you go with something that's a little bit higher seeding rate and can you put fertilizer on it? And he says, I'll buy it off of you. So we planted it. We always use a drill. It was really dry. It took 3 weeks for it to germinate because it was so dry, but it came ahead. We had the nitrogen on. We had a longer, more open fall than usual, but it was still a week too short. He didn't quite get enough tonnage. He baled it, he cut it, he baled it, he wrapped it. And his young lad spent the whole summer the whole fall picking up bales. I think they were all sick of it by the end. By the end, when we factored in our math, we both broke it even, but I got the luxury of having all that below ground root structure. I didn't have a lot of residue up top, and I had a check in my hand to cover my costs. So it was, I'd still gotten my wheat off that field, but it helped make the difference. So a lot of the time when we are starting with cover crops, you see all these things, and Patrick, like, what was it? Ethiopian something or other. Like it's kind of neat to hear about these things, but it's another thing to say, well, what should I do? And I know Ann Verhollen and Deb really reinforce the KISS method. And I'm a big fan of the KISS method because I'm cheap. But sometimes people like to tinker. And so someone like Patrick seems to really enjoy being the one who does something different or something unique. So I think part of this is like, what's going to actually make this fun for you? If you do have to work on the basics. So what you're going to do is going to depend on a few things. One is environmental conditions. So Patrick had those gorgeous pictures of the Phacelia growing. Those were those purple flowers. And I do Phacelia in my buffer strips, but I put Phacelia in this summer. And even though we had a really long growing season, none of it bloomed. I'm not going to waste my money putting that in again next year. But if you're in a longer growing season, that might be a really good fit. What equipment do you have? Like really, for me, KISS comes not only in the blend, but how you're going to actually have success in this cover crop. So seed to soil contact is critical. I prefer the drill myself, but that's not cheap. A lot of people have really good success, especially Deb was showing how like manure applications or getting biosolids out, you can broadcast the seed and then lightly incorporate it when you're incorporating your manure or your soil amendment. I am curious about hiring a drone or a helicopter to spread it. But again, that soil to seed contact, when you're just dropping it on the ground, you're probably going to have to go at a higher seeding rate and just kind of make sure you're building that into the cost. And it's just, you're not exactly creating a great opportunity for growth if you're not planning accordingly for how you're going to make that work. Market demand is obviously crucial. So for me, emergency feed has been a good fit. But up here, actually, if you go back one, you see the sheep here. So that is, some of you may know Chris Moore and Lindsay Smith from realag.com. And so those are their sheep, and they're actually grazing at Valley Bio. So Ruben took off his winter triticale and put in a cover crop, and it's working really well because they're buying his hay off of them. And then the sheep are eating it, and it's going out onto the field there. So Ruben gets the manure put right back on again after having someone pay for it. So that's really neat. The other thing is Deb had talked about how oat prices are really high right now. Yesterday, I was attending the organics conference, and a lot of the farmers there actually save their own seed in terms of they'll just have someone come in and do a quick cleaning. So Max Kaiser down along Bay of Quinte, they grow their own cover crop seed. They get someone in, they harvest it, and so maybe you're only getting that rotation, once every 10 years or once every 5 years on your farm. But that is a way to kind of help build in that, is look and see what can we do that's different, that helps us have these cover crops. We're not necessarily losing a lot, and we're hopefully gaining a bit, especially there may be local seed buyers that are interested in buying your oats. That was a big part of our cover crop business whenever I used to have the seed business. Was just growing oats for simply horse feed and for cover crops in the fall. And it was great because it was already, you grew it and it went out the door right away. What have other people tried in your area that's worked successfully? Like, you don't have to try everything yourself. What's worked and what didn't? This is a shameless plug for the Soil Network, but we have an Ontario Soil Road Trip app, or you can check out the website. And farmers like myself, these pictures I actually pulled off my own page on the website for this presentation. And it's simply, we were trying everything. So down in the bottom left, you see my kitchen sink plot. It was stripped. It was a whole bunch of different plots. I tried everything from the kitchen sink down to just simple oats or rye or even unplanted. And the cattle were supposed to graze it. They didn't make it, unfortunately. So I'll see how this turns out next spring. But as you can see, because I didn't get my turnip numbers down low enough, the turnips just took over. So it didn't really matter what I planted. It was a field of turnips. So it's just nice to be able to give people this feedback. And the last thing is and we're farmers, we're gamblers. We take our life savings and spread them out on the soil. Is what can you afford to lose? So, if you're starting with something new, it's like gambling. What do you consider to be a win? Do you want to go big or go home? Or are you good to break even? Or for you, is it like, I better not have dad give me a hard time at Christmas time? Like, what are your motivations? So mixes I've tried range from $15 to $100. Ruben Stone from Valley Bio actually has a really neat Excel spreadsheet that he's figured out for being able to do that. And I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything here. Nope, we're good. Wrapping up here. Oh, how do you know when you're making progress? So this is something for ourselves on our farm. It was always a fight between my dad and I as to where we should go and shouldn't go. So we had a tough old farm that was an old homestead, bared off clay knoll that you could see the ground even in the middle of summer the whole time I was growing up. And whenever we did spring wheat, we underseeded the red clover, we got a great establishment. We didn't want to do tillage. We did a fall termination. And what you can see on the left is what a lot of it looked like. And I was really worrying about slugs because we have major slug issues. But most of the field come springtime looked at what you see on the right. And I was kind of doubting my sanity because it was like, I remember there being a lot of residue here. So I was able to dig down and plain and simple, the earthworms did the work for me. And I'm seeing this more and more as I'm getting more cover crops in my rotation, is the residue is starting to just manage itself a little bit better because I have a better ecological system in place. So the other thing is, and again, this is the shameless plug for trying something like winter canola. This is actually spring canola, and you can tell that this canola has actually found some earthworm holes, but we are bloody dry. And just when you look at your soybeans or your corn root structures, having different root structures below that soil, having different root exits, it really does help reinforce that diversity in the soil. So we're seeing better infiltration, but I do want to have the disclaimer, we stopped planting early, which I know is counterintuitive. For us to do the better infiltration, the better drought tolerance, the less compaction, we had to wait till the ground was fit, which sometimes meant, because our cropping system is different than our neighbors, is we were planting a few days later. So my solution to that is just go to town and do something, or go and focus on something different instead of watching your neighbors run if you've got soil like mine. The side effect of having a systems approach for cover crops is we're making better management decisions in other parts. I'm seeing these fields now used to be the wheat came off, you double check there was no weed pressure, and you just leave the fields bare and you just do a burn down in the fall. Well, now I'm actually out checking the fields and seeing where things are coming ahead, where they aren't, what species are coming, what isn't. And plain and simple, we all enjoy being in the field probably more than anywhere else. So it's a nice bonus. So the key for your success on a systems approach is making sure that you're measuring what you consider to be benefits. So for us, honestly, it comes down to the yield monitor. I want to make sure I'm measuring my true costs. And like full disclaimer here, cover crops mean we don't have downtime in the summer anymore. We harvest, we soil test, we lime, we put our soil amendments on, then you're racing with the cover crop to the drill, and then we're racing to get our winter wheat in. And if you do hay, it's even worse. So that wasn't so great, but we found ways to make it work better. The nice thing is we are using our equipment more. We're actually doing some cover crop planting for neighbors. They don't have the equipment or they don't have the time, they're too busy. So this is a nice bonus for us. And then for me, it's better peace of mind. So I'm actually able to look and see, I did some SWOT maps, like what Deb was saying there. I also use Climate View, and I kind of really try to pinpoint where my fields are most vulnerable, and I target my cover crops to those areas first. Sometimes it means I fire a field. I was talking about that field earlier where we've done that, and do a lot of side-by-side. See for yourself first. Have you and a neighbor try something both similar on different ground, or again, touch base with a peer group. I do want to wrap up, so we've got time for a couple questions, and I think Jessica is going to show a cute video after this as well. So I don't know if many of you know Seb Belliard. He's the Omafra. I love this picture. They were doing some soil health assessments in our field, and my kids wanted to try it out. No, I'm not a Mennonite. My daughter just decided to dress like one that day. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, both Deb and Jen. That was wonderful. And going back to what you said, Jen, if there is a way to build soil health and make money, then that's what needs to happen for sure. And I also liked your concept of keeping it simple and making it fun, because there is so much stress and busyness going on a farm day to day. If you don't find cover crops enjoyable or the process enjoyable, it's just going to be that much more added stress to your whole farm system. And I just love how Deb was mentioning it, Jen, you were mentioning it, Tracy Ryan's mentioning it in the comments. Like, there is such a province-wide and beyond. There's so many networks building, whether it's the Ontario Soil Network or the pilot projects that Tracy Ryan with Ontario Soil and Crop is involved in. It's great. Jen, I can't remember if there is a link to the Ontario Soil Network, like for informational sessions.
Yeah, I will put that in the chat. Thanks.
Yeah.
And it's a team sport, cover cropping. It makes it more fun.
Yeah. If anyone has any questions, feel free to pop up and unmute yourself. We'll give it a few minutes. Otherwise, we've got a Cooking with Covers with Deb Campbell video to play as a little interlude before our next talk. Oh, Don McCabe, go ahead.
Thank you. To Deb, appreciate very much your insights on what you saw in Kansas. Would be certainly a wake-up call. Do you have concerns with the increases that we're seeing in the input costs right now? And this question would also go on to you, Jen. Is there enough value being realized to pull along and grow the acreage of cover crops, or are we just going to be still maintaining the pioneering effect right now? It's a larger concern for where the movement's going to go. Input costs are brutal and need a sharper pencil, and some people haven't found that pencil ever in their farming career. So what are your thoughts?
I couldn't agree more, Don. That's a very valid point that you're making there. And I've had this sort of brewing in the back of my mind as well. The last, say, 10 years, we've had pretty good cropping success. There's been some ups and downs, highs and lows and whatnot here in Ontario, but generally speaking, our crops have been progressing quite nicely over a 10-year period. And that also means that cash flow and profitability has been reasonably successful in the last 10-year period. And I think that's part of the success and infiltration of cover crops onto farms. This will truly be a test, I think, in 2022 of, what's the staying power of a cover crop system when the margins are tight. And, my hope, because my crystal ball isn't any better than anyone else, but my hope is that we can at least hold the ground, and we may not see some growth for a season or two, depending on profitability and the cost. But the other aspect of this is part of why my approach to build, as I'm building a cover crop for someone's, a crop plan for someone's corn, soybean, wheat, I'm also building their cover crop plan so that they have time. If you're budgeting your corn acre, you can budget your cover crop acre as well, and secure those inputs at a reasonable cost, hopefully. If your budget is literally, I don't know, $30 an acre for cover cropping all in, okay, how do we make that work, and what does that look like? And I'd rather be doing that plan now at the end of January than be standing there when the combine or the baler's in the field trying to figure it out then. So, having a plan, I think, is a big part of getting around and managing those costs. Now, to be fair, Dawn, I am very pro cover crops. So figuring out ways to keep that in the system is part of my plan.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I know Jessica's going to want to wrap up, but when it comes to profitability, Dawn, my dad always told me the best way to make a small fortune farming is to start with a large one, which maybe isn't what you want to hear. But sometimes us as farmers, we are our own worst enemies. So again, I owned a farm supply business. I was able to get like all these inputs at cost, and I still couldn't pencil it out if I wasn't getting the maximum return on investment of my nitrogen or of my high genetic seed. So the thing is what is your limiting factor? And a lot of us do that already with nutrients, right? Like you focus with your budget on what needs to be remediated first. So when you're looking at the cropping system, what is holding you back? If you have erosion, target that first. If you have, if you just want to have more diversity, well, what's an easy way to do that? And again, when you talk about cover crop, I really think in some ways this is great to have this much demand for things, because the cure for high prices is high prices. We are going to be seeing more people entering the market, more businesses being able to focus on doing that, so that we have a consistent cover crop instead of just, feast or famine. Some years everybody wants it, other years there's none at all. And I'll wrap up because your next speaker wants to go.
No, that was great. Thanks, ladies. Enjoy both your presentations. That was great. So now we'll just take a quick little interlude.